After you've set your quilt area will automatically become your default pattern box. And you'll see this PB pattern box 1 of 1. This is the quilt area I previously set. What I want to do now is inside my quilt I have several different pattern boxes that I want to set up. So underneath my home icon I have pattern box as an option. What I can do here is I can add a new pattern box so it'll keep my overall quilt area as pattern box number 1, or I can adjust my current pattern box under adjust current. Let's do that. Let's adjust my current all over pattern box to be my new pattern box. You can notice right here I have a little red crosshair that's showing me where my machine currently is. I move my machine to the first point of my pattern box, and down here I have 3 different options. I can cancel out of this because I mistakenly touched the add pattern box. I can hit the check mark, but only once I'm finished with my pattern box, and the plus button. I can add as many points as I want to this pattern box. Right here I'm going to select the plus button for point number 1. Now it's asking me to move counterclockwise to the next point for my baseline. Let me explain this. The first 2 points of your pattern box will automatically become what's called a baseline. The pattern that you put in, the base of your pattern, will match up with the baseline of your pattern box. So these first 2 points are going to make the baseline of my pattern box. I'm going to move my machine over to point number 2, and notice it drew a line, a diagonal line over to point number 2. I hit the plus mark. Now it's saying again counterclockwise, move your machine to point number 3, which is over here. Move my machine to point number 3. I hit the plus mark again. Lastly, I move my machine over to point number 4. Now for the very last point of your pattern box, don't hit the plus mark. You want to use the check mark for your very last point. The check mark will automatically add that point for you as well as finish the pattern box. If I hit the plus mark right now, it thinks I want to add another point to the pattern box, which I don't. This is the square I want, so I'll hit the check mark. Now you can see the pattern box I just set in that box. Now remember the baseline I referred to before. I'm going to add a pattern into this pattern box, and remember my baseline was these 2 first points, my left corner and my bottom corner. So watch when I put this pattern into the pattern box, it's going to automatically rotate to be square with my baseline. So the base of my pattern, the base of this stem right here, is going to line up with the baseline of my pattern automatically. It's going to automatically rotate that pattern to fit, to match up with that baseline. Now if I wanted to do several different pattern boxes, I can come in and I can add a new pattern box. I just want to set a small square over here on the corner. So there's my point number 1, and I hit the plus mark. Move my machine down. Point number 2, plus mark. Again, I'm moving in a counterclockwise motion. You always need to move in a counterclockwise to set your pattern boxes. Point number 3, and this one I want to be a triangle. So if that's my triangle right there that I like, I hit the check mark. Again, when you're finished with your pattern box, select the check mark, and now I have the triangle here on my screen. Notice up here in the upper left corner, I have a 1 with a little vague arrow behind it. That's how I get back to my pattern box number 1, by touching that 1, and it brings me back to pattern box number 1. This 2 over here is the pattern box number 2 that I just previously set up. I can touch the 2 and it brings me back to my triangle. Now let's say that you had a box more like a star or an L shape. I can add those into the system as well. The only downside is it no longer gives me my Smart Scale option. So let's set up an L. Even though I set it in a counterclockwise motion, because of the shape of an L and how difficult it is for the system to scale, the system's going to require you to manually scale this pattern. So notice here's the box I just set up in an L shape. So here's the pattern, the L-shaped pattern box I just previously set up. Notice when I come in and I add a pattern to this pattern box, just a very generic pattern. Again, according to my baseline, that pattern is going to rotate to be square with that baseline. When I come in to scale this pattern, I no longer have a Smart Scale option. Because of the type of pattern box it is, I only have the option to manually scale it. I don't have the option to smart scale. This applies to pattern boxes where points come into the box and then back out. Imagine this is a rectangle right here. Imagine that your L shape, miss it. Imagine that your L shape is a rectangle. But right here on the rectangle, I didn't finish off this upper right corner. I actually came into the rectangle and back out. Any of those pattern boxes that have angles that go in and then back out, like an L shape or a star shape, are going to be into this category of no smart scale option. But on my triangles and my squares, let's put a pattern into this one. Again, according to the baseline, this pattern is going to rotate. When I come here into scale, I do have the smart scale option to scale these types of pattern boxes. Now for setting pantographs, this is very easy. Say it's a pattern box that I wanted to set in my previously set quilt area. I go down to pattern box and I add pattern box. What I can do here is I can do a 2-point pattern box. It's going to automatically take these 2 points that I select and square them up. So here's my point number 1, plus mark. And again, I know it said move counterclockwise, but I'm just doing 2 points for this pattern box. Down here to the bottom right corner. Again, I started in the upper left corner, finish in the bottom right corner. I have the diagonal line drawn across the screen, and I hit the check mark. Again, if I hit the plus mark, I'm adding another point. Check mark finishes the box. Now you can see I have this rectangle drawn here on the screen automatically for me. I'm going to bring it back to the center. There. Now what I can do is I can add the pantograph pattern that I wanted to add. Come down to my home, go to add pattern. Let's just pick an arbitrary pattern under the floral. First one at the top, 3 daisies. That is the pattern that I want. Select pattern. It's going to put one set of the daisies inside this pattern box, but I actually want it to be 2, maybe 3, depending on how condensed I want them to be. So I'm going to go to my edit menu and I'm going to go to the repeat option. Across, I want to repeat. Let's try 2, see how that looks. 2 comes close, but I still have a gap over here. So I think that 2 still would look good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down and I'm going to scale this pattern. Smart scale is going to be my automatic scale, and what I want to do is I want to say no for proportions. I want this pattern to stretch out as much as it can to fill up this pattern box. So here is my pattern box. My repeats have been stretched to fill up the pattern box as much as possible. A special note on this pantograph, notice here in the middle, I don't have a circle and I don't have an X for the beginning and the end of these 2 patterns. I know they're the repeat of the exact same pattern, but technically the system sees them as 2 separate patterns. If I don't have the end point and the start point for the 2 patterns, that means the pattern will automatically flow through the end point of number 1 and the beginning of number 2. Now notice when I change the spacing for my repeat, so my spacing across, let's make it a little bit wider in between the 2. Notice when I change that spacing of the 2, I now have an end point for number 1 and a start point for number 2. What that means is my end of number 1 is going to automatically stop, and according to the jump stitch that I have set in the constants tab, is going to ask me to cut my thread and jump over to the beginning of number 2. If I want them to just flow 100% through the pattern, I actually want my repeats to be down at 0. Now some of the patterns you may need to adjust that spacing to make sure that your X's and O's line up properly for your patterns.